Okay, I think we're good. For those of you that are watching here today, and I can see that we have a nice amount of folks that are joining us, I'm really excited about this presentation for any number of reasons. I'm excited about the subject, and this comes up all the time. And we're going to hopefully bust a bunch of myths about whether or not a person who's on benefits, who's disabled, can work or not here. The other thing I'm excited about is I'm really excited about our speaker today here because as you're going to see, Alex has developed quite a bit of an expertise on this subject. One, because of his professional career, just ending working for a number of years at the World Institute on Disabilities, oftentimes on this subject, but Alex himself has actually used many of these tools in his own life. So we're not talking about theory here, we're talking about a real life situations here. And I will tell you, and as we go through this, Alex does a number of things. He's very passionate. You're going to hear about climate change and that sort of thing, but also, once again, he is doing work and he's doing consulting on issues dealing with working on benefits. And that's going to be a big help to the beneficiaries that we serve, as well as the attorneys and that sort of thing. So anyway, now, Alex, if you could switch to the next screen here. This has been accredited for MCLE credit. The program's been approved for 1.5 units of MCLE credit by the State Bar of California, which also, once again, is good for fiduciaries. And I know we're going to have many fiduciaries that are going to be watching this at all. Each section of this program has a code, so there'll be 3 codes in this program that the viewer will need to record to verify participation in the class. If you wish to receive MCLE credit, please download the MCLE credit form and fill out the proper codes for each section. Now, most of you probably don't have the form, so what you're going to need to do is record the 3 codes here, and then once again, you can email Amy, AMY, at gspt.org, and she'll not only send you the proper forms, but she'll also put you on the list for future programs once again. So getting back to Alex, Alex is a consultant on disability rights and the founder of Accessible Climate Strategies, LLC. He acquired a spinal cord injury at the age of 16 and has navigated his life using a mix of SNT-based savings, education, career development, government benefits, and personal income from work. He's worked over a decade, or has over a decade of experience in disability rights policy. Prior to consulting, he worked with local politicians and then spent 6 years as a global nonprofit, at a global nonprofit addressing climate change, resilience, accessibility, transportation, and financial empowerment for the disability community. Mr. Ghenis uses his personal and professional experience around balancing government benefits, income, and savings to help people with disabilities build financial success and still getting their much needed supports. In addition to financial consulting, Alex continues to work on climate change, resilience, transportation, and universal access across the built environment. Once again, he can be reached, and I believe, and if it's not in the PowerPoints, I'll make sure that it's accessible, but it's at alex@accessibleclimate.com, or you can reach him at 510-359-7361. Once again, I've worked with Alex for a number of years, and so I really appreciate, not only his knowledge, but how he's been able to apply this in his own life. One thing for folks that are watching this here, that if you have questions, please, once again, type your questions in the chat box, and when we get to the end of the program, we'll try to answer as many questions as we can. So with that, Alex, I'm really excited having you on board today. I've heard many of your presentations, and I learned something new every time. So anyway, dude, what do you have to share with us today?
Well, a good amount of things, and thank you for that very kind, generous introduction. And a couple of disclaimers before we start. So number one, Steve mentioned I have a disability. I have a spinal cord injury, and what comes with that is occasional spasms, and I'm holding a laptop on my lap. If my legs spasm, I will attempt a PG exclamation and might have to reset my screen. So heads up if that happens, it's no big deal, but might have a quick break there. And I'll tell you about why this is also important to me. So you may have noticed off the beginning, I said, or Steve introduced me as being a part of Accessible Climate Strategies, LLC, and you might ask, well, what does that mean? When I was at the previous nonprofit, I worked on how people with disabilities can navigate the world of climate change. And a lot of people think, okay, well, what's going to happen if we get rid of plastics and then that gets rid of plastic gloves, right? This is, the green transition is important. So is navigating the world as it transforms. This is why financial empowerment is so important, is because personal financial success and strategies really are a piece of climate resilience. And going through the bullet points here, the way that this works is it builds off the two models of disability. What I say here is the social model is ideal, but the real world is a mix. The classical medical model of disability says that being able-bodied is normal, having a disability is being broken and needs to be fixed. The underlying thing about this is that an inaccessible world is actually okay because it's made for the normal body, and then any sort of accommodations are actually a charity to like help out the broken folks instead of tools for equipment and empowerment. The social model kind of flips that upside down. It says that ability or lack thereof is a spectrum, so we need to create a fully inclusive and universally accessible world that includes physical infrastructure, it includes systems and supports. Government services are infrastructural systems, right? Healthcare and cash income, et cetera. And what we need to do is we need to aim for universal access beyond just the basic codes of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and aim for independent living. So that would be, say, living in one's own home instead of an institution like a nursing home. A medical model world is inequitable. We don't want that. We want to move toward the social model as much as possible to shape systems and build equity. But climate change threatens the core of both models. It increases health risks for everybody, including people with disabilities, and it threatens the social model because, if economies get upended, then social services might get hit. If a storm knocks out the elevator, then someone who can't go upstairs, these are important factors to keep in mind. So we must reinforce those social model systems and empower personal resilience for people with disabilities. And that needs to go the extra mile, first of all, because people with disabilities without supports are disproportionately affected by any sort of turmoil in the environment or the economy. And also, I always advocate for the precautionary principle, for being as judicious with one's preparation, with one's location, with one's finances, because we're in an uncertain place. And just as an anecdote for the current kind of crisis that we're dealing with, this is semi-environmentally related. As we push into forests, as we get connected with animals, we're going to have more disease and pandemics. And this is a new world that we're in. And for better or worse in terms of equity, money helps people survive uncertainty. Money makes it so that if, for some crisis, someone loses their job, they lose healthcare, and they need to bridge a month, even having something like a trust could be the difference between life and death in that situation, right? So, and then, someone needs to move north because California runs out of water. I hope we don't run out of water, but these are a lot of things that we need to care about. So I'd invite everybody here to write down this MCLE code 4776. And this is one of the codes to email to Amy in order to get the appropriate credit. Some vital part, I'm getting a lot of chats here, so just going to make sure that's okay. Great. Okay, so we got all of that. Now, the vital parts for independent living are number one, health maintenance and treatment. And the overall goal is not to be cured, but to be stable and happy. I'm not going to pretend like I'm going to walk again, but I keep my health in order, and that's what's important. Personal assistance, for example, personal attendance, household help, and transportation. Somebody cannot live independently without these bits of personal assistance in a lot of situations, depending on the level of disability. Assistive and inclusive technology, such as, for example, a touchscreen laptop, voice dictation software for someone who's blind, text-to-speech software that they use with their computer. For housing, ideally you want to live independently instead of in institutions, and say new housing tends to be a little bit more expensive, but it also tends to be more accessible. Again, this is why finances help with independent living. With government, community, and infrastructure, this is vital for independent living because if you don't have accessible buildings, if you don't have accessible transportation, if you don't have accessible events, policies, organizations, and agencies, people with disabilities are shut out from civic life and all the benefits that creates. Financial stability, government provides this often through modest cash income. People can have savings. Special needs trust is obviously a form of that. Regular income from work if they are able to. And then when they really well track their income and expenses, then they can actually be able to earn more money without losing benefits if they let the government know about that, and I'll talk about that later. And then another big part of independent living is just employment opportunities. It's the fact that we have now the technology where someone with a disability can work from home on their own laptop, how someone who can't easily use their fingers to type can use voice dictation to interact and gain employment. And that allows for financial stability, personal growth, and building careers. And then the next slide here is what money supports in these cases. So when it comes to health, trust, benefits, and income can provide public and private insurance. If somebody is on government benefits but otherwise would need certain copays, and they can provide that. It allows for elective surgeries, certain outpatient therapy. I myself, get occasional like myofascial release therapy. It's a muscle therapy, and that ends up being out of pocket. It's FSA deductible, but that's my own cash, and that's what income and savings can support. And then OTC supplies that would be, say, HSA eligible, but otherwise do need to be purchased out of pocket. So assistance, cash from government, and in a lot of cases, this is what people with disabilities will be getting is, say, supplemental security income or Social Security disability insurance, government and private pay, attendant care, driving and transportation, having enough money, say, to frequently use BART or rail or buses is really important. So for technology, baseline and advanced mobility equipment, someone might have some money where they can pay for a faster motor on their wheelchair, and that actually can help in terms of, in rainy situations, whatever it might be. Vehicles, adaptive vehicles, accessible vans, and accessible driving equipment are not cheap, and that's useful. Software and assistive technology. For housing, we care about rent, mortgages, accessible housing, which is often more expensive, subsidized housing being a government service that can assist people, and then paying out of pocket for accessibility modifications can be thousands or tens of thousands of dollars, depending on the circumstance. When it comes to government, community, and infrastructure, money, this finances can support healthcare and benefits, adaptive sports and entertainment, agency help for individuals, and then also accessible infrastructure. Financial stability, people care about backup savings in case of emergencies, supporting the other categories, and when it comes down to it, more income is better as long as people get their other related needs met. And employment opportunities, it supports school. We want to support school, things like the Department of Rehabilitation, have someone with a disability be able to get an advanced degree, which is often necessary when you have other pieces of employment discrimination that people come into, and then job transitions and things like the Ticket to Work program and other government services that help people get employed. Now, I want to give a little bit of a philosophical movement here, which is looking at how to view trusts. A lot of people think of trusts as supplementing income and savings in order to give someone kind of a smoother, longer-term quality of life. And the way that this would work, now I'm going to give a few different graphs I put together starting with a $1 million trust, mixed funds. So let's say, it's a more conservative thing where you get a steady 5% interest and you have a budget delta and that grows with inflation. So a few examples are going to be one perfectly balanced budget, 3 deficits and 2 surpluses that grow with inflation. We're going to start with a $50,000, a $37,000, and a $20,000 deficit, and the surpluses are $10,000 and $30,000 annually. And then we'll add real life, and that'll be the next step, and that'll be why we need to rethink the way that we look at trusts. So here's what things look like. Life's budget is entirely even. That's the green line down at the bottom. The $1 million with interest is purple, and that actually is covered up by the red savings because the income just grows with savings. Let's say that you have a $50,000 deficit growing with inflation. That red amount ends up canceling out what would have been the $1 million interest and runs out after about 30 years. And remember, the less money that you have, the more quickly it goes down, just because of the way these things work. With the $37,000 deficit over the course of 30 years, it's $1.02 million, and it's less than a quarter of what an untouched fund would be, which is just over $4 million after 30 years. With the $20,000 deficit, that money can actually move upward over time. So just keep in mind that, yes, trusts can supplement income, and if somebody has a 30-year lifespan ahead of them, this isn't necessarily a bad way to go. You can run a $20,000 deficit, but, and I'll go to this the next time, it's better to use the precautionary principle and try to get as close to break even as possible. If we have a surplus, you end up having more money. So instead of about $4 million, you get closing in on 5, so 120% of the untouched fund. If somebody is able to earn a lot more money and start saving it away and investing it with a $30,000 surplus, then that ends up being over $6.5 million at the end of those 30 years, or 161% of what the untouched fund would be. Now let's add real life. So these are imagined events, and these are imagined types of events that to some extent, and usually with smaller numbers, I've encountered, actually. So let's imagine that you do all of this, and actually, so we're going to add number 1, personal expenses that are a quick cash outlay, $80,000 of access costs for home modifications and a modified van in year 3. Let's add 2 major personal crises of, the medical stuff that leads to lack of income, major medical outlays, a need for new cash income, whatever it might be. That's a $100,000 hit in year 12 and a $300,000 hit in year 24. We run into a couple of market crashes, 15% in year 8 and 30% in year 15. And then a early, I say quote unquote retirement, because that's the year after that $300,000 personal crisis. So let's, imagine someone has a major health crisis, they've been working, and then, darn it, I just can't do it anymore and have to start taking out $50,000. What ends up happening is with this balanced fund, where it would have been just over $2 million at the end of those 30 years, when you have these little green dips at the bottom, and those are the major expenses, combined with the market crashes that make that $1 million with interest bump down. This is the balanced budget, ends up being pretty much break even, ending up at $1 million, but it's less than half of what the untouched fund would be. If somebody's running a $50,000 deficit, that's actually depleted in year 18. And this is the $50,000 deficit that will have lasted 29 years and change in the other situation without any of these major life events. A $37,000 deficit gets depleted in year 23. A $20,000 deficit ends up with about 7% of the original $1 million, so $70,000, and that's 3.2% of the untouched fund after 30 years. A $10,000 surplus ends up with $1.5 million, still less than if it was an untouched fund. And then right here, a $30,000 surplus ends up with $2.5 million, so more money, or about 112% of what the untouched fund would be. So this shows that if you really want to prepare for the things that might come along and you want to prepare long term, it's better to be number one, at least close to break even, and have a surplus if possible. Now, budgeting for independence, the way to increase that annual kind of budget surplus, or decrease the deficit, whatever it might be, is number one, maximize cash income. So this is finding the beautiful balance between cash benefits and income from work. And in some cases, actually, earning enough income from work will cancel out the equivalent benefits entirely, and then someone just goes to doing their own thing, not working with the government. In some cases, it means staying just under a specific threshold so that somebody can keep a certain amount of cash benefits and just kind of maximize their take-home income at the end of the month. Secure government services as much as possible so that they don't need to pay out of pocket. So I'll give the example of in-home supportive services is a assistance with personal attendant care. And for someone who receives the maximum number of hours per week from just that program can close in on $40,000. If somebody's able to apply and receive that, that's $40,000 that they wouldn't have to pay out of pocket. That's $40,000 the government is catching, and that is money. That's money that this person gets. So apply for the government services that otherwise would, be cash out of pocket. Protect the savings as much as possible. Be careful with the way that the investments are, and try to manage that budget delta. Build a career in order to build income, and also resilience. If someone gets laid off, but they have really good professional connections and have showed themselves well, it's easier to re-find a job and then restart income. And then invest in life quality. I'm not going to pretend that I haven't bought a couple of nice things to make my life a little bit better. I've written for a magazine, just did something on accessible video gaming being a thing that improves people's mobility and mood. I bought an Xbox. You can see I can't use my fingers well, but I finagled a joystick and now my left deltoid is stronger, right? This is the kind of thing where, okay, those little purchases, if they improve a quality of life, I wouldn't feel too guilty about them. Instead, try to figure out the rest of the budgeting things so that it's not a point of guilt. Moving on to this next MCLE code. So this is code number 2. Feel free to write this down, and then you can email Amy afterward. Is 8033 is the next code. I'm going to drink a little bit of water here and then move on to the next section. And if you hear anything in the background, my one of my quarantine mates is doing home workout, so might be some weights. Oh, whatever, that's fine. So okay, can I work and is it worth it? This is the next spot. So number one, can I work? The point is almost always yes for people with disabilities. Many jobs can be done with assistive technology. You can say some of these quote unquote essential jobs might be worthwhile for some people with disabilities as well. Not all people with disabilities, use wheelchairs and need attendant care and the rest of it. There's, sensory disabilities, there's cognitive disabilities, there are chronic health conditions, et cetera, that sometimes limit the amount and types of jobs that people can do. But what we've found is that folks can be incredibly successful with adaptive technology. Some jobs are logistically impossible. I'm not going to be a car mechanic. As I said, hands don't work so well. Actually, one of my friends has a $50,000 mechanical arm attached to his joystick that he operates with a sip and puff on his mouth. I mean, the amount of technology that they have right now is really phenomenal. And it depends on the next question, which is it worth it? And when I ask, is it worth it? I say almost always yes, same as can I work? But there are programs, rules, and some thresholds to keep in mind. Also, there are rules to keep in mind, and it's important to have regular contact with government agencies if there are ever any changes in how somebody works. And then it does depend on the circumstance, and really some jobs should be avoided if, depending on the income, they put someone into kind of one of these limbo areas where it's not worth it. Now we're going to talk about cash benefits, and this is looking at what happens to somebody's government cash benefits, so that's like Social Security, disability insurance, when they start working. I'm going to use a couple of examples here, and we're going to talk about two different types of income. The first is supplemental security income, so that's SSI. That's cash benefits for people who have low monthly income and limited savings. The next one is Social Security disability insurance. That's SSDI. That's somebody who was working and paid FICA taxes and then acquired a disability that makes it so that they can no longer work in their job and they can no longer work and earn kind of this arbitrary threshold that the government puts forward. And that's SSDI. SSDI often has more generous checks than SSI. And actually, I put in a second category here. CDB is childhood disability benefits. That's somebody who is younger, has a disability, and is the child of a Social Security retirement benefit or SSDI recipient, and they get a similar monthly check to their parent. And it has the same rules as SSDI, it's just kind of under a different name and they get it in a different way. So what we're looking at here is somebody, an individual in California, and I've created this graph looking at the bottom, gross monthly earnings, so that's pre-tax, and on the left, post-tax monthly income. California is kind of a high-tax state. It does provide more generous services than some areas. We have a lot of infrastructure and there's a lot of upkeep and maintenance there. So we do have this kind of flattening curve of progressive taxation here, where somebody earns $6,000 and they're actually taking home about $4,500 at the end of the month. And this is monthly income, by the way, monthly income. So knowing the difference, if you're working with any client and they are trying to figure out how and what kind of work they can do, it's important for them to know what kind of cash benefit they're receiving because they have such different rules. The good ways to do that would be sometimes if you look at the monthly check, if they receive a physical check, it often will say on that check. Otherwise, reaching out to the local Social Security office and asking them are two very important things. So with SSDI and that childhood disability benefits, so for Social Security disability insurance, the amount that somebody gets varies by prior income. So if somebody worked for 30 years as a specialist physician earning a lot of money, they're going to get near the monthly maximum, which is around $3,000 right now. If somebody was working a minimum wage job for 7 years and then acquired a disability, they're going to be in the hundreds of dollars per month. The childhood disability benefits, as I mentioned, is the child of a SSDI or Social Security retirement beneficiary. Anybody who's on SSDI or CDB gets Medicare. So not Medi-Cal here in California, Medicare difference. And actually, if they work to the point that they're no longer receiving benefits, they still keep Medicare for a little bit over 7 years. There are no asset limits, so it doesn't depend how much money you have in the bank. And there are complex time threshold and time frames that we'll go over shortly. With supplemental security income, This is a federal benefit that then is supplemented by states often. In California, it is the $735 federal rate, and then the state supplemental program in California brings the total to $943.72. Somebody will automatically get Medicaid, so Medi-Cal here in California is the name of it. There are asset limits, so somebody can have $2,000 worth of cash in the bank and $3,000 if it's a couple, an eligible couple. Something to keep in mind on that is that somebody can have access to, say, a house, a car. There are certain exempted physical assets that they can have. And there are exemptions to where the money can be saved. It can be saved in a special needs trust. I'll also talk about ABLE accounts, which are available to some people with disabilities. And the amount decreases gradually with what they call countable income. And I'll show you the math on that too. First, let's look at the SSDI and CDB. So this has two different thresholds. I really recommend folks check out the website disabilitybenefits101.org because it has really good breakdowns of the different rules for all of this. So there's 2 or 3 different thresholds and on SSDI. It receives this check, and these are 2020 numbers. It goes slightly with inflation. So somebody that can earn under $910 without it affecting their benefits at all. Somebody can earn 9 what they call trial work months, which is over $910 per month in a rolling 2-year window. So if they work every 3rd month, then actually they can pretty much keep benefits indefinitely. And they could earn as much as they want in each of those trial work months. They could earn $50,000. You don't want to cheat the system and just get a bunch of income from work and then give you a $50,000 check. Government's not going to like that. Often they actually average a few beforehand, but theoretically, this is kind of how it goes. It starts once they've used the trial work months. It starts a 36-month extended period of eligibility, and that's kind of where it moves over so that there's a new threshold, which is what they call substantial gainful activity. If somebody, after they've used the trial work months, over the next 36 months, if they earn over $1,260, they don't get a benefit. If they earn under $1,260, they get a benefit. And then Medicare continues for 7 years after that. It's really complex. It's kind of frustrating, but that's what it is. Now, what we're going to look at here is what life is like in this extended period of eligibility. It creates a work disincentive called the cash cliff. So within that extended period of eligibility, a small change in income, so going from $1,259, that's just under that SGA, the substantial gainful activity, and then earns $1,261, then their potentially $3,000 check disappears entirely. So the drop may be difficult to make up for some people. Let's go back to that graph that I was talking about, and I've put a couple of things in here. All right, so the red kind of solid line with a little bit of a gap, that's somebody's SSDI check. The dotted blue line, or the dashing blue line, that's their total income. So there's income from work plus the SSDI check. Now, when their gross earnings, this is at the bottom, hits $1,260, their SSDI check goes away entirely, and then they have to make up that gap. The dotted red line right there is what the level of the cash cliff is. So that's $1,260 a month from work. In this case, where somebody has a pretty modest $700 SSDI check, at the cash cliff, the recipient takes home $1,829 after tax. And then it drops down to $1,131. So there's a pretty big drop there, $700. Granted, they're getting more than if they just had their check period, but $1 more, you have a huge drop, and somebody must earn $2,138 per month to return to that cash cliff level. Then they earn more money, and they're in the green relative to where they would have been, but it's still annoying. You have to earn 70% more to get back to where you were. If they have a $1,500 SSDI check, that's an even more dramatic. So at the cash cliff, the recipient takes home $2,630 after tax. It drops down again to $1,131. That's going to be every single time. And someone has to earn $3,188 per month to return to the cash cliff. So somebody has to go from $1,260 all the way up to $3,188. So they have to earn 250% more or less what they were. They have to earn 153% more on top of what they missed. Here's somebody with a $2,500 SSDI check. At the cash cliff, they get $3,630, and they have to earn $4,569 per month to return to the cash cliff. So they have to earn over 3.5 times what they were earning before. This is a huge work disincentive, and it's tricky, but I'll explain why it's not necessarily an end-all for someone who's career and income-oriented. SSI's income rules are much less harsh. They are much, and this is really bad punchline for the day, kinder. The countable income calculation. So I'm going to go with non-blind. It's more. The numbers are a little bit different if somebody is blind, and I'd recommend going to that DB 101 website if you want to learn those rules. And they're pretty easy to find. So the first step is to take unearned income. By the way, everybody, I'm going to take a small pause just to see if the chat has anything important here. Okay. By the way, thank you, Steve, for responding to the Q&A on the chat. And step one is going to be you take unearned income. For unearned income, as far as SSI cares, would be something like retirement benefits. It would be something like SSDI or a CDB check. They could consider a gift or say sort of earnings on interest also could be unearned income. So you take the baseline $943.72. Then you would take your unearned income minus a $20 general exclusion, is what they call countable unearned income. The step two would take earned income, money from work, minus the unused part of the general exclusion. So minus, if somebody doesn't have any unearned income, then you do minus $20 entirely. If they've got, $100, then you don't have anything left. Then you subtract $65 of what they call the earned income exclusion. Then you subtract what they call impairment-related work expenses. This could be costs for accessible transportation to get to and from work. It could be modified equipment. There's a lot of things that can be deducted as IRWIs. And those actually, they do have to be run by the Social Security office before, and they need to be approved before you're allowed to use them and kind of put them into this whole math. You take that subtotal, you divide it by 2, and that's countable earned income. So you take the countable unearned income plus countable earned income minus something called a PASS plan, which is a specific savings account approved by Social Security Administration with a career-oriented goal. And then that leaves countable income. It looks like tricky math. What it leads you with is that the rest is pretty simple. You meet the asset limit guidelines. So if you're an individual, you have less than $2,000 in the bank, you take the federal SSI plus the state supplemental, you subtract the total countable income, and you get the new SSI check. So what that looks like is this. If somebody doesn't have any check from SSDI or childhood disability benefits, then they keep the first $85 of their check without penalty. You can see here at the bottom left, there is a slowly sloping down green line. And what that is it shows that after that, the SSI, which is that green line, drops 50 cents for each dollar earned. And SSI disappears after $1,972 of gross income, which is $1,700 net. And what you have is that the total income, which is that dotted blue line, always goes up. If somebody is earning $1 more, then they pretty much take home 50 cents. It feels like a little bit of a hit, but again, if you're long-term career oriented, or just if you want some more money in the bank, that's fine. This is a good way to go, is to work more. If somebody can be what they call dual eligible, where they receive a modest SSDI or childhood disability benefits check, and then they receive some SSI as well. So the SSI fades away entirely, and then when you get to $1,260 and the SSDI goes away, SSI kicks back in. And then goes down at that 2-to-1 ratio. What this does is it kind of softens the blow of the cash cliff, and you get back to the cash cliff faster. So $1,784 instead of $1,800. You know, it takes some time, but it's a better way to go. With a $1,200 SSDI check, again, it softens the blow of the cash cliff so that it doesn't plummet all the way back down to that yellow line. It does take the same amount of income to get back to the cash cliff. So, and then it would be the same thing with the $2,500 check. It would take the same amount of income to get back. If you are long-term oriented and you recognize that there's the opportunity for, say, a job that gets $3,000 a month, right? Actually, I'm going to go back to this. Let's say you have a job that gets $2,000 a month, and actually you take a pretty significant hit, but you know that there's a career gain opportunity. You know that it's a company that has a reputation for good promotion and career development. Somebody could take a short-term hit, and the trust could support them in that moment because they know that eventually they'll go back up above the cash cliff. And in the meantime, they're building skills, they're building connections, they're building their career, and they might feel like they get a little bit of an extra kind of bump in their sense of purpose in life and in the world. It doesn't mean don't work. It means view it as a stepping stone. So working on Medicaid, using California's Medi-Cal numbers, so we're looking at Medi-Cal. So there's 4 different categories that somebody could do if they are working. There's what they call aged and disabled federal poverty level Medi-Cal, which is if somebody is over 65 years old or has a qualifying disability and they have assets under the asset limit and less than $1,271 in countable income, they receive that. If somebody is on SSI, if they are eligible for SSI, they have the lower assets and their income is enough to keep under SSI, which is $1,947 a month, and they have a qualifying disability, then they can get that. So this is what a lot of people with disabilities are on, especially if they have a low amount of monthly income from work. 1619B is when they get above that, about $2,000 a month. 1947 would be, $2,000 a month. Sorry, I'm spasming here. And give me about 1 second. Okay, we're good. So the 1619B program is when somebody was eligible for SSI for at least 1 month, and they have assets under the asset limit, and it allows them to earn a little bit more money and still keep this. So that's $37,706 in annual gross income, which is $3,142 per month. So 150% of the SSI based. It allows for what they call individualized earning thresholds. If someone with a disability were to go to Social Security Administration and say, you know what, I would have $40,000 in attendant care, and if you take this away from me at $37,000, it doesn't make any sense. Can we renegotiate this? Can I tell you what my otherwise out-of-pocket disability expenses would be, and let's bump that number up. That can be a conversation and a negotiation with the government. The final category is the 250% working disabled program. This is if somebody has a qualifying disability, they have asset under $2,000, but they can also have two other types of accounts, which is a 401k and a work-only checking account. So I myself have one checking account that, gift from mom and dad, or my roommate pays me for something that I purchased on Amazon, whatever it might be. That's my regular checking account that's always under $2,000. Income from work, a paycheck, direct deposit from my previous employer, the income that I'll be getting through this LLC, that goes into an individual work-specific checking account. And somebody can have that in this 250% working disabled program. The income threshold is 250% of the federal poverty level in countable income, which is about 500% of the federal poverty level in earned income, which would be $63,470 in gross income per year. Like that, it's generous, it's good. Other disability income, including SSDI and retirement, is exempted. So actually, there's other good stuff on top of that. I really recommend that people try to explore 1619B and the Working Disabled program with it whenever possible. The Working Disabled program is great because it allows for those extra savings venues, and that money is in the hands of the client. That doesn't have to be managed by a trustee. It doesn't have to be managed by a family member. The rest of it, it's this person's money, and they can spend it on whatever they want. It doesn't even have to be, they can spend it for a gift for their friend, which they wouldn't be able to do under a trust because it has to go to their well-being, right? It gives someone more financial independence, and that's important. All of these provide what we call full scope Medi-Cal. So that's core healthcare, including hospital visits. It is disposable medical supplies. It is durable medical equipment, this wheelchair that I'm sitting in. Dental through Medi-Cal. Provides in-home supportive services, that attendant care that I mentioned. It's more than many private and employer health plans. It's more than Medicare in some respects, and especially that attendant care piece. It's more than Medicare in that respects. And so it's worthwhile getting, and somebody can have an employer health plan and still keep full scope Medi-Cal. They can have eligibility for multiple categories there. The other savings alternative that can really help people, there I mentioned the checking account. ABLE accounts are another savings alternative. There's a lot of kind of eligibility qualifications here. So it's for someone who acquired a disability before age 26. The savings don't affect government benefits with certain limits. There are, if somebody can save up to $100,000 without losing SSI, every other government benefit, including food stamps, including Medi-Cal, can be up to the maximum limit of the account. And in California, that's $529,000 can be saved in this account that is under the control of the beneficiary and the account holder. Account holders control the funds. They can use money for a wide range of expenses. It still does have to be for their own well-being, medical well-being, but it could be groceries, it could be gas for travel, it could be, there's a decent amount that somebody can spend. It can be housing and rent. The investment accounts grow tax-free. That's a big advantage over a trust. And it allows for, I think California's program has like 4 or 5 different mixed asset Vanguard accounts. The annual contribution limits are $15,000 period, and that can be from the individual. It can actually be a transfer from a trust. It could be from a family member. It can be, some of them have crowdfunding links on the website. If somebody's working, that they can add more on top of that from their own personal income, and that's $12,490 is the maximum. So if somebody's working, they can start saving away in this account $27,500 per year. And going back to that first bullet point, it doesn't matter how old they are now, as long as they acquired their disability before age 26. Steve mentioned I was 16 when I had my accident. I'm over 26 now. You can see by the hairline, and that makes it so that I can still have an ABLE account because I had the injury early. CalAble is California's ABLE program. It just added, for example, the access to a debit card, which is really great for a lot of people with disabilities. It's a generous program. It's good. Many other state programs are open to Californians, so someone could shop around. ABLENRC.org is the ABLE National Resource Center, and they let people compare plans. Other ways to save that somebody can do: special needs trust, no contribution limits, no account maximum. Money can be in investment, savings, and checking account. A family, guardian, lawyer, or trustee manages the money, and it must be spent for the good of the individual. Expenses must be tracked, and investment gains are taxed when the money is withdrawn. 401k and retirement plans are only allowed under the 250% working disabled program. If somebody loses their job, then they can keep that retirement program if they document that they were previously on the 250% working disabled program. There's no account max. There are tax penalties for withdrawals before retirement, and not all employers offer those. So just a heads up, but places offer retirement accounts. And actually, I say 401k and retirement plans, they also allow for pensions and things like that. The individual development account is money set aside for specific goals, usually used to save for school, to purchase a home, or to start a business. It must be cleared ahead of time by Social Security Administration. Some of these are run through nonprofits that actually will do a matched contribution, which is pretty cool. You give $1, they give $1 or 50 cents or whatever it might be. So then there's also the plan to achieve self-support. This is money set aside for specific work goals. That must be cleared by the SSA. The income put into the PASS is something that can be discounted and withdrawn from that countable income. So it actually doesn't impact SSI benefits at all. And PASS money that's spent on goals then doesn't impact SSI benefits either. That's not considered, say, for example, unearned income when you take money out of that. There are a few employment options. So for somebody looking to go back to work, you could be part or full-time hourly employee, which provides many options. It gives reliable income in a lot of cases. It is easier to stay under SSDI and or Medi-Cal and Medicaid thresholds if somebody can really work that out with their employer. The logistics are handled by the employer. There's something you said, by the way, in this. If somebody is paid, let's say every 2 weeks instead of twice a month, or somehow the number of days in the month makes it so that 1 month is more than another, SSA will average out months if you can demonstrate that you were doing the same amount of work month to month. So they'll, you can let them know about that if it seems like you're pushing some sort of an income threshold or limit. Full-time salary work also provides reliable income, the possibility for flexible schedules. It gives good career development. There are often more responsibilities, and sometimes it's, if you got to pull an all-nighter to get this deliverable to us, then you have to do it. That can be a lot for anybody, and then for some people with disabilities especially. The logistics are handled by the employer. By the way, I put that on the hourly and salaried work because if you get over to these things like the freelance gigs and starting someone's own LLC, there's a lot more paperwork that comes with that, and that's something to keep in mind. So moving over then to freelance gigs, it allows for flexible schedules. It's good for working from home. So someone might be good at writing. They can do freelance writing. They get Dragon Naturally Speaking as their adaptive equipment to write at home, and they feel like they have insight about disability. There's online disability magazines, it might be $40 an article. There's others where, if you've got good experience, then you can earn more money, but it's good for work from home. Somebody must be diligent with savings and taxes because this is money going directly into their pocket, and they'll need to document that income, those earnings, and then move from there. They must secure their own insurance. If they have Medi-Cal and they're staying under the threshold, then maybe that's the insurance that they have, and maybe that's all good. There's no option for a 401k under the 250% working disabled program because it's a freelance gig, because it's not technically, this employer. An LLC, and we'll talk about this right now, gives a lot of other really good opportunities. So first of all, the flexible schedule, somebody could work from home. I personally am starting my days, a couple hours later. Part of that is having a disability. The mornings can be a little bit longer, and sometimes it's nice to have a break. That's not possible with a 9 to 5, right? So this is the kind of transition that I've made now in order to take care of my own health and well-being, but still get the same amount of work done in the meantime. So you can have that flexible schedule. It does require discipline and investments to operate well. So somebody may, may need to figure out how they can file the paperwork, how they can do all that through LegalZoom. The LLC can cover business expenses, so it could cover, for example, a portion of rent that's a fair portion of rent to accommodate a home office. It can then provide 401k and healthcare if somebody chooses to do so. It can also have a separate business checking account that can make it so that if somebody needs to save up money then for a large business related expense, then that's something that can be separate from their own savings, if their own savings would make it more than $2,000 in the bank. So let's look at that and what that looks like. So the benefits of having an LLC is it allows for a reliable distribution of income, which helps stay under income and threshold limits. An example of this would be, say, if somebody is does the kind of work that I've done around building a large research report, and it's a $20,000 contract over the course of 5 months. So good money, $4,000 a month coming in, but the person is given that money right up front. They get that money, they need to put it into the bank, that $50,000, and then they can pay the person $4,000 a month. And the person is handling all of the income here, but they're just making sure that they stay under those income limits, even though there's this massive check coming in for the business work that they're doing. The LLC can cover otherwise out-of-pocket expenses, attendant care directly related to employment and working. So if somebody gets enough hours that they can, through in-home supportive services, so that they can get their basic needs met, but they actually need some help from someone, an attendant, for printing and scanning and managing paperwork and some of the physical stuff, they could pay that individual. It can pay for transportation expenses, so gas and mileage could be reimbursed actually at a federal rate of 57 cents a mile, and to cover maintenance and operations and insurance and stuff, as opposed to just the cost of gas. And this could be reimbursed that way. It can cover a portion of rent if it's a home office. It can cover the expenses for technology and equipment, and beyond things that are just reasonable accommodations. It can pay for a nice PC that somebody uses for work, for example. It can provide employment benefits that otherwise would not be available under freelance work. It adds legitimacy to a small business. It can build its own credit. It's able to often do better contracting than an individual would do, and adds more legitimacy there. And then it also adds liability protections that somebody wouldn't get under a sole proprietorship, for example. There are cautions. It's to be diligent with budgeting, logistics, paperwork, and reporting to relevant agencies. So this is the sort of thing where you need to let not only Medi-Cal know if something's happening, but also regularly be giving paperwork to the California Franchise Board for having an LLC. That's paperwork that needs to be filed every year, and that's logistics, and then that's several $100 filing fee, whatever that much might be. People do need to be disciplined when they're managing business expenses versus personal expenses. And what I say here is an LLC can cover attendant costs when working, but likely not what they call what I'd say is everyday life attendant work. It's possible that it could. That would be a discussion and a conversation with Medi-Cal. You need to utilize separate accounts and credit cards and not get sloppy with how, say, don't let an LLC pay for something that's not related to the business, because then that could run afoul of the government agencies and just law in general, right? So explore different businesses, legal and other management platforms. Somebody could work with kind of an individual. I myself am doing a lot of work with LegalZoom. My brother also does some contracting, and LegalZoom is a big partner for him as well. Moving on to this last little bit, and please mark down this MCLE code, number 3. The third code here is 0471. Cool. Now, the big reason why and actually I'm going to double check here that Steve isn't telling me to hurry up or something. All right. Well, maybe I won't. All right. What's on the chat?
Oh,
did I miss a code?
fine.
All right, I'm all good. There we go. The big reason is expenses and IRWIs for starting an LLC as opposed to freelance work or anything like that. Impairment-related work expenses, this would be something that somebody has to mark and let the government know that they're doing these expenses. So something qualifies as an IRWI if all of the following are true. And you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 bullet points along with this. This is the kind of thing that, again, in that countable income calculation, somebody could discount, right? So something qualifies if all of the following are true. Number 1, you bought an item or service that you need to work. So, you know, a minivan could be that if somebody lives in a place with poor public transit, right? So that's an IRWI potentially. Or it could be Dragon Naturally Speaking, or it could be something else along those lines. You need that item or service because of serious health condition, disability counts. You paid for it yourself and nobody reimbursed you for the cost. You paid a reasonable price for it, so you shopped around. There was nothing out of the ordinary there. You were working during the month you paid the expense. So actually, if somebody wants to do, prepping for starting up work, or they had a gap between projects, it might be a problem. You can fully document the expense with receipts, which is usually not a big deal, but another piece of logistics and paperwork to make sure, and that IRWIs are approved at the local Social Security office on a case-by-case basis. That's a lot of work that somebody would have to do depending on how much freelance efforts they're taking. So let's see what this looks like with freelance work using IRWIs. So the customer is at the top here. It pays the freelancer. The freelancer splits up that payment into 3 buckets here. Taxes that are set aside and need to be kept somewhere. So again, in that working checking account, if they start up a second one, would be okay. Then have a personal savings account for everything else, or personal checking account, whatever it might be. And then set aside business-related expenses. So the taxes that are set aside, where's that money go? That goes to the government. For personal savings, you've got reportable earned income from work, and you can discount some IRWIs. The tough thing about discounting IRWIs is they only, unless you're blind, and you can do what they call blind work expenses, impairment-related work expenses, you can only kind of deduct half of the price, half the cost of that from your countable income. So you can do that, but it's not one-to-one in terms of avoiding hitting those government thresholds. The business expenses, you can do your best to do personal tax deductions as well. So using an LLC is those IRWIs get shifted. So here I'm going to go back one slide. On the freelancer, you've got taxes, personal savings, and business expenses. And on the bottom, you've got government reportable income, IRWIs, and personal tax deductions. And what this does is it pretty much shifts the IRWIs over to a business expense. So the payment comes in, the money goes to taxes set aside, which is the same thing, and it goes to the government. It's just taxed through the LLC as opposed to an individual. Payroll goes to reportable income for the individual. And then those IRWIs get into the bucket of business expenses. And they are shielded from being countable income at a 1-to-1 ratio. So the ratio is actually better, and it lets people earn more money without losing benefits. And then non-IRWI related business expenses also can be covered by the business itself. And then this is where the graph gets larger, is you can also add employer benefits if you want, set aside some of that. The LLC can establish a 401k. It can purchase Blue Cross, Kaiser, whatever other healthcare to supplement Medi-Cal. It can do paid time off. I mean, these are the kind of things where it's like working in a 9-to-5, but with more flexibility and being able to use this resource, this tool, as a way to better manage benefits and keeping the maximum amount of income. So decisions are going to be a few, and there's several steps. If someone establishes an LLC, number one is develop a long-term game plan, including realistic full-time equipment and income, full-time equivalent and income levels. Evaluate upfront costs through a lawyer or online LegalZoom. So setting up an LLC and licensing it in California is probably closing in on $2,500 or $3,000 expense right off the bat. So somebody would need to do that, file for trademark, LLC, and business licenses, and establish other logistics. So do things like signing up for, say, QuickBooks or some other budgeting software. Inform the government agencies that you have a new job and what your anticipated income levels will be. Then establish clients and contracts. Make yourself well known. Deposit money into a business account when those clients and contracts are set up. And then direct money accordingly, which is payroll, taxes, personal income, retirement, and business expenses. And make sure that you do that judiciously and don't get in trouble with the government. So this is my journey. And you can see that this is how I went through my life with the trust. And I wish that I could go, I'm not going to go all the way back, but if you remember that graph with kind of the roller coaster of the different life events and what might happen to the stock market, this is my roller coaster, where every time that there was a green, I was able to save. And every time that there's red, I drew down some money. So this is my journey with the trust, pretty much. I was injured with a settlement. I got a settlement, and that was in a trust. Childhood disability benefits, because my stepdad actually has a disability himself. And I was able to acquire CDB through him. Went through college and grad school and was really careful with my money through college and grad school, lived in co-ops, things like that, right? And the trust was able to earn interest in that interim. I got my first job, actually working in renewable energy, and then switched over to the 250% working disabled program. And then I left before the 9 trial work period months were up, because I realized that actually disability rights was where I wanted to be. So I talked with them, I left, I realized that my 9 trial work months weren't up, and it was probably, it was a good run, it's not gonna work, like, I'm really sorry, it sucked to leave a job that early, but it's how it goes. I left that, and as I was setting up my resume and starting to rebuild my career, yes, I drew down from the trust. I had housing modifications and a home office that I built up. I started doing freelance writing and a job search. I stayed under SGA. So I was still doing a tiny bit of a drawdown out of the trust, but not a ton amount. There was part-time. I was at the World Institute on Disability, which is that nonprofit. And then I was able to stay under SGA, working part-time. As I went to WID, I was working on climate change and disability. And the way that nonprofit life works is you go and you raise your own salary. So I was working part-time and writing grants to get more and more. And then eventually, yes, we were able to secure grants. I was brought up to full-time. I got onto the working disabled program. I went over substantial gainful activity, no longer had really any problem with government benefits, and actually was living a break-even or slightly above break-even life. I purchased a van because there were a lot of driving around presentations, and it just seemed like a good opportunity. It's certainly been a lifesaver right now that public transit is such a mess. I had 2 major health events last year. I won't go into details, But those health events plus kind of realizing, okay, disability life plus a 9 to 5, we needed something more flexible. Talked with the staff there, left WID, decided to do this more flexible and solo work, established an LLC and did investments out of my own pocket, wasn't using the trust for that. And that was actually, I was able to do that because of the money that I saved in my own accounts while working full time. And now moving back into consulting and stable income. And it's a roller coaster. It's a roller coaster. I'm at less money in the trust than I was before, but it's 16 years out. So it is what it is, and I'm working to be break even and going above, and always recommend that people do that. The question then, what's in a trust? I always say resources for my success. This is not a thing to spend, do what you will. If you leave it alone and it gains income, then that's not a resource for your success. It's a resource for safety for the future or for massive things, but you want to see where actually is how that breaking down. What I have spent my equivalent money, I won't say what the amount of money is in the trust, but and this is really, really rough numbers, but housing improvements, an accessible van was a large outlay. To supplement income, and so it's career transitions was a chunk of it. And then emergency expenses with, for example, the health events. And then the rest is long-term savings and still sticking around. So I reassess and I say, okay, I've got 2/3 of it left. That's the remaining funds. And now that's resources for my success. And it's a brand new pie chart. It's a slightly smaller pie, but it's a brand new pie chart, right? So that's that. We've got about 20 minutes for Q&A. I wanted to say thank you, everybody, for joining. Hope you got a good amount out of this. Thank you again, Steve and GSPT for inviting me up. And I think we'll open up the questions now.
So hopefully you can hear me at this point. Here, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. One administrative thing. Can you go back to the third code here, because there seems to be a question about what that number was. While we're doing that, I have to tell you, Alex, you are the most amazing guy, So, it's nice to get past theory and get into like the real world. And so I really appreciate this. A couple of comments before we go through the questions. You and I have talked about this a lot, and you talked a little bit about the benefit of working, but, to me, and we have to realize the disability community is a broad community. So it's like if you've met one person with a disability, you have met one person with a disability. But to me, these working disabled programs, dealing with the cliff, looking for these working issues, to me, that is the avenue for independence for so many people with disabilities. And it just drives me crazy that the common way to look at this is disabled people should not work. I guess they should sit home and watch Ellen, which, by the way, I like Ellen, but you got to have more to life than watching TV. So, to me, the folks I work with who take this on, and I've got to expect, Alex, this wasn't easy, but it adds to such a more fulfilling life than, being dependent on a trust or being dependent on benefits. I'm hoping you're back off the dude.
Yeah, and well, I view as much as working is valuable, the financial stability that comes from being able to build up, let's say someone signs up for the 250% working disabled program, the financial stability and benefit that comes from being able to have savings and being able to spend them as one pleases is so huge. So my example, I have multiple disabilities. I have epilepsy, and I had that health event over summer was just a gnarly seizure that was at a bad time in the night. I aspirated. I ended up in the hospital in a coma for a week, right? I had money saved in my personal checking account. I knew that my care attendants were living paycheck to paycheck, and all of a sudden I'm out for 2 weeks, and there's no way that I'm gonna cheat the system and sign these people IHSS hours while I'm there in the hospital for 2 weeks. So I was able to use that personal checking account to give these guys a little bit of cash and help them out. And you know, that was generosity of being an employer like that. I've kind of felt like that was my version of giving them sick hours. I would not have been able to do that if I hadn't been working and built up personal savings to do so. So in that respect, like it's super valuable in more than just one way. Steve also knows I've written for New Mobility magazine, and I was mentioning that article of people using video games, and spoke with someone from Mount Sinai Hospital, and they said the biggest thing about this is people being socially engaged. You know, it's all good and well that they have better movement and mobility, but there really is something to just having regular activity for a lot of people with disabilities that are watching Ellen or whatever it might be, right? And yes, work is a great way of making connections. It's a great way of boosting one's emotional and psychological well-being. And I recommend it for logistics, and then just for you know, emotion, psychology, the rest of it.
Okay, so let's plow through this as much as possible, as many of these questions as we can. I know we have a couple of folks that are listening to the webinar, so the last code once again was 0471. And then Alex, as I go through the questions, why don't you go to the last page? And in fact, I want to, I'm not necessarily going to take these in order here, but you are available for consultation. A lot of the questions we're going to have here have to do with CDB and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And yes, you do charge. I mean, the question was, like, is this a real business and do you really charge? And my understanding is yes, you do.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, which, by the way, on occasion I do too. So that's part of being an attorney. If they were looking for general information, if somebody's looking for general information here and really are not in a position to pull out the checkbook or that kind of thing, where might they go?
Disability Benefits 101 is my go-to website for so much stuff. As I was putting this together, this slide, you know, my prior slide deck I had 2019 numbers, and I was able to go to db101.org and get the 2020 numbers without even blinking an eye. I mean, it's a great website. Highly recommend it. It has some interactive calculators for figuring out, for example, countable income, or what other benefits people could do. So yeah, I recommend that. And otherwise, feel free to reach out, or if you don't see information on that website, I usually have access to it as well. Or
yeah, so I don't think a week that goes by that I don't refer this db101.org to at least 2 or 3 people and all that. By the way, we're expecting an expansion of that through a generous donation through the May and Stanley Smith Trust, and I think some other folks threw some bucks in there. So, I mean, this is such an important issue. A couple other things. With CDB, and I bet you we have a lot of questions about childhood disability benefits here. One of the questions is there an age limit here? And we'll start with that, and then I've got a follow-up on that.
I believe, and Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, that it's if somebody is the child of a beneficiary and they acquire a disability before age 18. Is that correct?
Well, it's actually 22. Oh,
22, right. Okay, I was a little bit taller or higher up.
And here's the other thing to look at. I do, as a former psych nurse, I do a lot of work with folks that have behavioral health issues. You know, it's really common that maybe you didn't get your SSI, maybe you didn't get your diagnosis, you know, until maybe you were 26, right? I mean, like, for instance, schizophrenia, it's really rare that it didn't start well beyond 22. But so do you have to start getting benefits before age 22, or can you prove that later?
That is a question where I would need to go and double check. My inkling is it would be tougher, and it would need to be a negotiation and a discussion with SSA. On that note, for those ABLE accounts, though, if a doctor can write a letter that says, we diagnosed, and someone can have it on hand, and the letter says, this was diagnosed at age 28, but we are confident that this person has had the disability since beforehand. Since before they were 25, ABLE is usually okay with that. SSA and childhood disability benefits I'll need to look into. Steve, are you aware of that?
And I've actually had to deal with that here. And I know there's a lot of questions about childhood disability benefits, but I want to really focus on the workability issues. The fact is that you could be diagnosed later, but it's going to be a facts and circumstances with Social Security. And one thing here is dealing with an ABLE program, which is run by the IRS, which oddly enough is a much friendlier disability program than Social Security, at least in my experience. With Social Security, you're going to have a facts and circumstances situation, but we've had many folks that have gotten childhood disability benefits who didn't get a diagnosis until later. Okay. Here's a couple of questions that came up. I have SSDI applying share of benefits for both my disabled daughter, who's 20, and my spouse, who takes care of her. How is the family maximum benefit split between the two? And now that I've read it, unless you have the answer right off the top of your head,
you can go ahead for it.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I'll hold that program. I have another person that will be just doing a webinar later. And as far as dealing with the family maximums and how that's split up, that's something beyond what we can do. Daughter disabilities. So I'm going to jump to some of the chat questions, and we're going to get through as many as we can here. Let's see. I'm sorry.
I'm going to get to one of these really quick because I think it's important on the LLC front. Is the second to last question in the chat is, I'm under SSDI. Do you know if I have an LLC with investment passive interest income, not earned income, and doesn't interest income exceeds the 250%? So the LLC's banking, the LLC's checking account or savings account, if it's earning interest, whatever it might be, that is separate from the individual. The LLC is its own kind of living entity. The individual can be the manager of the LLC and get paid through the LLC and the rest of it, but those funds are separate. And that's not, if you give some sort of like investment earnings paycheck to somebody, yeah, that's income. But otherwise, any interest or money going directly into the LLC doesn't affect the individual. And that's why it's such a valuable tool.
So and then the question after that, like I said, we're not going to do these in order. What about people that are working into retirement age? Are there anything specific for not losing programs here in Section 8? And I think this presentation doesn't really get into Section 8 at that point. That's a whole different subject. Mm-hmm. But as far as, here's one of the magic things. For many people, when they turn 65, you're no longer disabled, you're elderly. When you're dealing with that, but some of these programs still work for seniors?
Yeah. And ABLE account savings are shielded from Section 8 if there's any asset limits. So pretty much any government program.
We have another one, and I'm kind of working from the bottom going up so I can not miss one. on point of changing our attitudes towards trust and their uses. And, once again, I hope that folks are looking at this maybe with a new mindset to trust. Obviously, as a trust attorney, yes, we set up a lot of special needs trusts, but they're just a tool here. But they said that you're expanding their perspective. That's good. You're doing a good job then. So far, we set up a special needs trust for our adult daughter that kicks in when we die, or we say when your trust mature, because in our office, nobody dies here. So I inherited the funds recently. Can I set those funds up now into a trust that allows my daughter, with my guidance, to manage those trust funds to enhance her quality of life here and give her more options to access while keeping her SSI? She's about to start a senior in college and then plans on being employed as a web developer, perhaps with an LLC. Let me give a little commentary, and it's almost like a comparison, okay? A special needs trust by its definition, it doesn't mean that your daughter can't give guidance, but a special needs trust by its definition is a form of a spendthrift trust where the trustee has absolute discretion and the beneficiary has none. That's why it doesn't count against their SSI and Medi-Cal. Now, a lot of times when you're setting when you're trying to work on trying to help somebody with a quality of life, and I try to make it that clear that there is a loss of control with these trusts. They're just inherently, there's a loss of control. The special needs trust here is going to be a loss of control. With an ABLE account, your daughter will be in control, okay? And for most people, that's a good thing. For some folks, maybe not. But if you're looking for control, and if we're truly looking at somebody being independent, control's an issue, right? And I think that's been a problem with the disability world also all the time. And, I was fortunate that a fellow named Ed Roberts really put me in my place here, that these are not folks for your compassion. They're just real live people here. And, to truly be independent, we need to look a little further. With your plan with the LLC and all of that, and even the CLIF, the concept of the CLIF, really, if you're looking for maximum independence, that seems to be the route you would head, assuming that it's possible to do that, right? So I think you've demonstrated very well that the trust, and you must have had a good trustee, can be something that can provide those resources for you to, make this remarkable journey you've been on. But a lot of that, once again, you were not in control of that trust. The trustee was.
Yeah.
Right.
And we talk monthly. It's this is the sort of thing where it's incredibly important to be able to give input and inform the person about either immediately necessary expenses or what might be around the corner.
So really, that is one of the problems with a lot of the tools that we use, because once again, we should always be helping a person with a disability live the best life, quality of life possible, but also to have control over their lives here. And, in a way, the problem with a lot of special needs trusts is they're really just not, and depending on the trustee, once again, the beneficiary cannot control the trust, and that's the point. Here's a question about ABLE accounts here. What sources of money can be used to fund an ABLE account? Can retroactive SSI payments in excess of usual monthly payments be put into an ABLE account? And I'll add one more question. If you put your earned income in it, is it still earned income? So what can you stick in an ABLE account?
Anybody can contribute. So the collection of your family members, friends, yourself can contribute up to $15,000 a year. I think that'll probably bump up in the next year or two. If somebody is working, then they can contribute, what was it, $12,470 out of their own pocket. So if somebody gets an SSI check, they can't have it deposited directly into the ABLE account, but the second that it gets into their personal checking account, they can go over the ABLE and do just an electronic funds transfer into the ABLE account. you can't ask your employer to deposit money. That would not somehow do an end around about it being counted as earned income. So it would be that would be the kind of thing where the individual able account holder, any contributions from them needs to be directly from their own pocket. Any contribution through work, income, my checking account, able account, and it still counts as income. Distributions from the able account are not considered unearned income, and actually family contributions to the able account also are not considered unearned income.
Okay. Here's another one. I'm close to retirement. When I start taking Social Security, as I understand it, my daughter will be able to change from SSI to childhood disability benefits, assuming the disability was before the age of 22. Will this cause her to lose her Medi-Cal, or will she have to switch to Medicare, or does 1619B allow her to keep Medi-Cal since she was on SSI? And if you don't know the answer to this, I actually do. So
do you want to take that one?
let me take a stab at this, and on our benefits workshops, it gets into this. 2 years after getting childhood disability benefits, you would be qualified for Medicare, okay? And for many people, here they'd be Medi. Under the rules, and I will say, Social Security makes a lot of mistakes, shocking as it is, but they make a lot of mistakes. So sometimes you got to really be on top of this. That even if you, now your income is larger than enough to knock you off of your SSI, you still qualify for Medi-Cal or Medicaid in other states, okay? And there's a site that does that. Now the difference, and you may elect to do that or you may not. To be on the Medi-Cal, you still have the $2,000 resource limit. So here's the thing that comes up, especially when we're talking about the cliff. If all you're using, your Medicare, for instance, is going to cover your medications, but there's going to be a copay, right? And sometimes you can do that through Covered California or something like that. What it's not going to cover, it's not going to cover long-term care. So, for instance, if you have somebody getting in-home support services, that's Medi-Cal, and you're probably going to want to do everything you can to preserve that Medi-Cal, at least until you can transition the cliff. And the concept of the cliff is you can go a long way with benefits, which Alex has demonstrated, but there is a cliff, right? And there are folks that have, I've seen transition the cliff, but you need to be aware of where that is. And so oftentimes, for instance, if you have significant attendant care costs, that's really going to be a significant issue about how can you transition away from a Medi-Cal or Medicaid-based benefits to paying for that privately. And that's a big jump for many people, right? So go ahead.
Well, yeah, and Medi-Cal has lower copays and deductible situations and things like that than private insurance does. So even if someone were to jump over to employer-based health insurance, it never hurts to be double or triple insured, especially when they cover different things.
So one of the questions was the difference between payment for Medicare and Medi-Cal. And, you know, we've had situations where we've had people drop the Medi-Cal. In fact, I had somebody this week, I counseled them that it just wasn't worth the hassle. And this is somebody where they're only using it as a copay for their meds. And in their case, it made a whole lot more sense financially and probably as far as independence is concerned, just to go ahead and get a supplemental policy through Covered California, pay that out of your pocket and say to heck with the Medi-Cal. For folks that really are using significant IHSS, they're probably not going to be able to be that cavalier, but it's kind of a puzzle, isn't it? And different pieces for different folks. And you just have to understand how to move it around. Yeah, this other question, well, maybe we should do a program on CDB, but I'm going to pass on those today. I know there were a couple more questions, and we actually are getting much to the end of our time. So we have one here. We have an ABLE account, but I'm interested in a trust similar to Alex's here that my daughter can access as an adult. Can you create the trust now, or here, can you do it later? And as I tell people, if you're setting up the trust, and I think the type of trust that you had, Alex, was what's called a third-party trust.
Yeah.
Was it? The answer is you should set it up and fund it at least the day before you die. But since we don't know what that date is, you might want to do it sooner than later. The other thing with it, without spending a lot of time on this, and obviously as a practitioner who does special needs trust, hey, what's best for me is to do the trust. But a lot of the things that trust does, you can do out of your own checkbook for a family member. What the trust does is it basically allows those that support to continue upon your incapacity. That was one of Ed Roberts' favorite sayings, is the disability community does not discriminate. It will accept any of us at any time here. So if you became incapacitated or whatever, you can continue providing that support. And obviously when you pass away, when you die, when your trust matures, whatever you want to call it, here, once again, it can continue with those supports. And I will mention, and I tend to be a bit of a pessimist, we're taping this in, well, there's an old term. We are recording this here in May of 2020, and there's a little event going on called the COVID-19 here, and we don't know what's going to happen with some of the benefit programs going on out there. So there's a lot of uncertainty going on, which is why advocacy is so important.
Yeah, there was a conference call not too long ago, and they were talking about the governor's revised budget includes cuts to social services. And after all of this, because we've got a 60 or 50 some odd $50 billion hole to figure out how to make up. And it's something we're all very cognizant of.
Alex, we probably should, I'm sure we could go on and on. And this is recorded, assuming the recording, so it says it's recording, assuming that everything works, we'll have this posted probably by tomorrow. Alex, I've heard different versions of this several times. I pick up something every time you talk. I know this was kind of like trying to take a drink out of a fire hose. So I think for many of us, we will be going back through this webinar again, but once again, I think going through all these programs and opening our eyes, really, if nothing else, about the possibilities that oftentimes people, both persons with disabilities and families, are told that you cannot work, here you're going to screw up your benefits, you're going to go homeless, that sort of thing, that just simply isn't true, here. And like I say, and we've talked about this many times, the thing about these workability programs is that for many of the people that we serve, it is a true avenue to independence here. And so you family members that are setting up trusts and that kind of thing, expand your vision a little bit, learn what you can. But, part of this is, as you set this up, there's two parts of the trust if you're using the trust to support. One is setting up the trust, but it's also, the other part of that is having a trustee, or making sure we have a trustee who is really going to share the same vision here that, your son, your daughter, your loved one, here that we want so much more. Couple of things here, clarification. My daughter currently collects less than $700 per month in SSI and has Medi-Cal. Oh, she currently has that. She would receive about $1,200 a month in childhood disability benefits. So here's what would happen. If she started getting $1,200 of childhood disability benefits, that's unearned income, which would reduce her $700 a month of SSI dollar for dollar. the math is real easy. It will knock her off of SSI, which as far as I'm concerned is a good thing. SSI is not a friendly program. It has all the housing restrictions and all the crazy stuff that goes with it. So giving up the SSI is not the end of the world. Under a thing called the POMS, once you go on childhood disability benefits, you are still qualified for Medi-Cal or Medicaid. On top of that, 2 years after that, you will be qualified for Medicare. You'll become Medi-Medi. The more programs you can get, the better, okay? The Medicare will cover most basic acute needs, but what it doesn't cover is it doesn't cover long-term care and it doesn't cover attendant care. And that's usually the big distinction. So we've had many cases where we've worked with consultants and told folks it's just not worth the hassle of keeping the Medi-Cal or Medicaid. We've had many people where that's just not going to work for them here. So that's basically how that works. With that, here, Alex, I want to thank you so much for your presentation today. I know it's a lot to digest. And your information and materials about the LLC here for folks who are looking at setting up their own business, I think is invaluable in the right situation. Alex's information is there. Alex, I'll give you the last word. And with that, Mrs. Dale says it's lunchtime, so we need to close. Okay.
I just, you know, the thing that comes to mind, and thank you everybody for joining. Thank you, Steve, for inviting me to speak. The thing that comes to mind is one of those slides early on, which is, can I work? Almost always yes. Is it worth it? Almost always yes. Just leave that, and I'll be available if anybody wants to reach out to assist with these sorts of scenarios.
Yeah. Okay, with that, I want to thank you so much, and we'll get this posted as quick as possible to the information, be able to get the form for the MCLE credit, to get on future webinars. Here we have one coming up with an employment attorney who's going to talk about issues when you have abuse at home and that thing coming up. We do all sorts of different programs. Email Amy, AMYGSPT. With that, I want to thank you and have advocating and good afternoon. Bye.